meets a woman at a well, which seems to us than just another innocent encounter. But if you stop and think about what actually happened at that well and the significance of this man meeting this woman, you begin to see how the Scripture speaks through the description of acts in ways that mere words do not convey. Jesus is involved in a transgressive act, speaking to a strange woman at a fountain, at a well, in the middle of a place where people come to gather water. They have a conversation. The disciples have one reaction, the townspeople have another. So I want to talk a little bit about the setting of this gospel reading, and I want to talk a little bit about the conversation as I imagine it. And then I want to focus a little bit on what happened, especially with the townspeople. I said that this was a transgressive story in the sense that Jesus was breaking barriers, breaking boundaries. What kind of woman hangs out by herself at a well in the Middle East at any given period of time? Ones with bad reputations. I have had students from Middle Eastern countries who tell me that even today in many of those countries, if a woman is leaving her home to visit the home of a relative, another person or two or three need to accompany her when she's in the street, because if she's in the street by herself, it is assumed that she's engaging in prostitution. So Jesus and the disciples come to this well. They're worn out from a long day. Jesus decides to stay and drink some water and relax, rest a little bit, recoup, while the disciples go for some food. And the woman shows up. Now, this is an awkward situation. He's not supposed to speak to her. She's certainly not supposed to speak to him. She's supposed to kind of come get her water and scurry away. What's he doing hanging out at a well anyway? The first transgression is he initiates the conversation. She couldn't be blamed if she thought that he was hitting on her, because that would be the normal way of describing what was happening if a strange man talked to a strange woman at a well. Secondly, she's a Samaritan and he's a Jew, and the Samaritans and Jews were cousins with rival theologies, and they kind of looked down on each other. So they kind of avoided each other. Remember the story of the Good Samaritan? I mean, the whole point of that is that the one person that the people Jesus was talking to were supposed to suspect of being crafty and devious was the one who ended up being good and compassionate. So here's the Samaritan woman, all alone. That's one strike against her. She's a Samaritan. That's another strike against her. The ethic of the day would be for Jesus to simply ignore her, sit there and not say anything. After all, if she's there by the well, by herself, she was a violator of the morals of the time. And she was supposed to be shunned. And because she was a woman, of course, she was powerless. If he wanted to make accusations against her and beat her, he was perfectly within the right to do that. But instead, he initiates a conversation. And she's stunned. She's stunned by the fact that he initiates the conversation, by the way the conversation goes. Well, why isn't your husband with you? That's an accusation, maybe, except that she doesn't hear it as an accusation. Because by the time the conversation has wound down, she runs off to town when the disciples get there to bring everybody else from the town back. In this conversation by a well in Samaria, Jesus and his disciples, who aren't really supposed to be there, they're taking a shortcut rather than going through the established route, conversation with Jesus. And just from the result, we don't know exactly everything that was being discussed. We do know that he starts out by making a reference to her many husbands. That wasn't necessarily to show that he was some kind of prophet that can kind of figure, well, I can tell this woman that's had 3.5 husbands or something like that. It means he's making an assumption because she's there by herself. And like I said, if you're at a well or any place that's kind of isolated and a stranger comes up to you and starts talking to you, you wouldn't like it if it was an accusatory conversation. You wouldn't be running back into the community to tell all your friends to come out and meet this guy if he sat there and drank water that you were drawing from the well and told you how worthless you were. That's what the religion of the day was telling her. That's what the people in the community were telling her. But it doesn't seem to be what Jesus did. Because, and we've got a few clues of this, other than that opening line that Jesus kind of throws out there to see how she responds. Of course, she runs into the community and people come out because they want to see this man that she's been talking with. But the other thing is, what happens when the disciples get back? John says they were kind of awestruck that he was sitting there talking with a strange woman. Like, doesn't this guy know any better? What does he think he's doing? Doesn't he know how to mind his manners? And when she goes into the town, she doesn't take the water that she came to get with her. She leaves it there. She's promising Jesus that she's coming back. Everything seems to indicate that this conversation that Jesus had with this woman was not confrontive as much as it was healing. Not that confrontive conversations can't be healing in the long run. But by the time the disciples get there, they're so struck at the familiarity, that's the Greek word that's used there in the gospel. Jesus and this woman whose name we still don't know are having a good time. They are at home with one another. Not exactly what a rabbi is supposed to be doing with a strange woman in a strange place. I suspect that he did deal with her pain, and he probably dealt with her suffering. And what strikes me is that all of that was done in a way in which, by the time the conversation was coming to an end, she didn't walk away with her tail between her legs, with her head hanging down. She was comfortable with who she was and with who he was. And she wanted other people to know about it. And the disciples were astounded. There's a third thing to notice in this story, and that is the way the story ends. Now here's this woman of low repute who's been out to the well by herself. Usually she would go out in the middle of the day when nobody was there because of the heat, so that nobody would bother her and nobody would make accusations. And she goes back into the community, and she's full of excitement going around telling people, I just met this man who knows everything about me. And so a whole bunch of people follow her out to the well. And what does John tell us? John says, what? They follow her out because of what she had said. And then they stay at the well because of what they experience. They follow her out because of her experience. They stay there because of their own. In our own spiritual lives, he invites her to a new life. And it's like old times, the two of them together, which is pretty scary to those disciples. They have a conversation that is healing, a conversation